I'm Robert Polito, Director of the New School Graduate Writing Program, and this is a very exciting and special and moving occasion. I'm happy to welcome back to the New School our good friend Tracy K. Smith so soon after she received the 2012 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. And I was about to say that does deserve its own particular round of applause. And she's going to be joined by another wonderful writer, Patrick Rosal. So maybe we could just kind of work through the whole introduction as a series of applause lines. We want to thank all of our other good friends at Canem, Allison Myers and Hafisa Jeter. I'm sorry. Stuttering over that word, but Allison Myers and Hafisa Jeter. So I wonder if we could give them a round of applause also. Can I have a round of applause for Lori Lynn Turner at the New School? What's always exciting about these evenings for us at the New School is the mutual devotion to the art and craft of poetry that moves back and forth between Canem and the graduate writing program at the New School. And you'll hear that, during every piece of the evening, during the readings and during the discussion and the Q&A afterwards. So it's also now my pleasure, and this is another applause line, to turn the evening over to Camille Rankin, another good friend. She's a poet, and she's also the assistant director of the graduate writing program now at Manhattanville College. So please join me in welcoming Camille, and she'll launch the rest of the evening.
Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. As Robert said, my name is Camille Rankin. I am formerly the manager of external relations and national program at Canem, recently moved to Manhattanville, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight to moderate one of my favorite programs, Poets on Craft. So I want to just say a little bit about CC, Canem, and just say thank you for our hosts and funders tonight. Canem, who, for those of you who don't know us, we're a national organization dedicated to the artistic and professional growth of African American poets. And Canem achieves this through workshops, readings, fellowships, book prizes, and conversations like the one we're going to have tonight. Launched in 2008, Poets on Craft is a series that showcases the work of poets in the early to mid stages of their careers and provides the opportunity for readers and writers to engage in a dialogue on the diverse landscape of contemporary poetry. I hope that you'll learn more about Canem's important work, their many New York City programs, and ways to support them by visiting their website, cavecanempoets.org. I also want to say thank you to our hosts and co-sponsors for the evening, the New School for Public Engagement, especially Robert Polito and Lori Lynn Turner, the School of Writing. And thanks to the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the Mrs. Giles Whiting Foundation, and the New York State Council on the Arts, our funders for the evening. So tonight I am thrilled to be welcoming two talented poets, Patrick Rosal and Tracy K. Smith. And we're going to start with the reading by both poets, then we'll move on to conversation, and we'll finish with Q&A, and then we'll hope that you'll join us for a reception afterwards. So I'm just going to start out by introducing our poets. Patrick Rosal is the author of 3 full-length collections of poetry: Boneshepherds, his most recent, My American Kundiman, and Uprock, Headspin, Scramble, and Dive. One reviewer notes, "In Rosal's world, beauty and pleasure are contagious. So is the charm of his poetry." His honors include a Fulbright Fellowship, the Association of Asian American Studies Book Award, the Global Filipino Literary Award, and the Asian American Writers Workshop Members' Choice Award. He is a member of the creative writing faculty at Rutgers, University-Camden, and the core faculty of Drew University's Low Residency MFA. Tracy K. Smith is the author of 3 poetry collections: The Body's Question, winner of the Canem Poetry Prize; Duende, winner of the James Laughlin Award and the Essence Literary Award; and Life on Mars, winner of the 2012 Pulitzer Prize. Yeah, isn't that great to say that? Congratulations, Tracy. Terrence Hayes says of her work in Life on Mars, she infuses her masterful gifts with wondrous intensity and tenderness. This book and this poet are vital and incomparable. the recipient of the Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award and the Whiting Writers Award, and a finalist for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work. Smith is a member of the creative writing faculty at Princeton University. Please join me in welcoming the first reader for the evening, Patrick Rosal.
Hey everybody, I am so happy to be here. You know, when you're a writer, you have this secret roster of folks that you want to read with, and Tracy and I have never read before, and so I'm so happy to read with her, especially the week that she finds out that she wins the Pulitzer on her birthday, no less. That's a pretty good birthday present. I'm so happy. I'm going to read mostly from Boneshepherds, but I might dip into the other two books too. Duende Undone. And so we've all been told to shut up. Don't talk, they say, too fast, too loud, or for too long. Don't take too much time trying to tell the truth. But this is my work, to break out among strangers into laughter. How I've watched small children, for example, fill with the lucky gust a poem can ride into the near stillness of a room and dance. For that, I am always, as now, grateful. My father tells me in his seminary days, during the Japanese occupation, most of the priests who ran that school were German. The boys then were to speak only in Latin and would surely be slapped 3 Sundays back if heard speaking the language of my father's country, which is a beautiful country and a beautiful language, and which has a curious word for being so suddenly seized by affection, you clench every muscle from your eyelids to your toes for wanting to hold a loved one tight, to squeeze one and kiss one, so deep you place yourself and your beloved on the brink of physical harm. There's no word for this in English. No word for those small provinces of silence or for the kind of love that will trouble that silence into music. My work is trying to find the very word rippling in my body, which is a woman's body, my mother's, and a man's body, my father's, and nowhere to be found in the languages that have conquered the lands of my ancestors. On the outskirts of every empire, there are man-made lakes large enough to receive with ease 100 villages worth of bones tossed into them. This is a fact. There are more than 7 million Ilocanos in the Philippines, maybe 1 million in diaspora. All of us at one time or another have been told to shut up. Don't talk too loud, too slow, or for too long. In Saudi Arabia, in Madrid, in Tokyo, in Milan, on Bowery near the foot of First Street, we've been told this. Some of us have been famous liars. Ferdinand, for example, who married another liar, Imelda, and my grandfather, Capitan of the Barrio, who claimed to kick the shit bare-fisted and single-handedly out of 14 ruffians in the small barangay of Santo Tomas. Actually, he kicked the shit out of 5. 9 ran away. These are not lies. This is the truth. I'm not wealthy. I can't buy space or time on billboards or websites. The name I inherit doesn't part columns in the city's daily journal. My family comes from a long line of farmers. My cousins scrubbed their chopping blocks with salt. They shush the goats before they kill them. And the Knicks are closing their regular season tonight. People who like inflicting pain on themselves are Knicks fans. So this is a basketball poem. It's a poem actually that begins in basketball and ends in history. little men with fast hands. The sweat flicks from your elbows when you deliver the sweet no look to the big man on the wing. You've been running whole crews since noon. It's a hard country, 90 feet long and 50 feet wide, and everyone on the borders wants in. And no one belongs for more than 48 minutes at a time. You know most all the players' names, some you named yourself. You know in a half-court set how to pick a crossover from a point guard's hip and when to talk shit to the 7-footer who dunked on you last week hard. They know you'll chase down the lead man on a fast break and eat gravel just to make sure the young gun with the swift first step is the only one not smiling when the two of you square off next time. You know how to box out a stocky forward on the inside with a slick hip pull so the ref can't see you are a little man with fast hands. Come from a long line of stealth and flash, like the Filipino scout who scaled solo the sheer face of a mountain with nothing but a bolo blade in his teeth to reach a small squad of slumbering Japanese soldiers in a cave camped out. The scout slit the necks of 14 without waking them. He let the 15th sleep. This is just ball, but you know what's up. Our hands are quick, the history is deep. Bienvenida, Santo Tomas. So I've been to the Philippines exactly 3 times. The first time was when I was 13, 14 years old, and I didn't go back for another almost 25 years. And then I was lucky to go back again in 2009. And this poem, Bienvenida, Santo Tomas, it's about how I got welcomed back the first time as an adult. To the Philippines. And I think that it also, I think a lot of the poems in this book do, but it's sort of, I'm asking a question about sort of the coincidence, and I don't mean coincidence like, hey, but the incidents at the same time of music and violence, of terror and art. How do they exist in the same world? And love, for that matter. Bienvenida, Santo Tomas, from my Uncle Charlie. In the middle of my uncle's yard, a goat, bound at the hooves, wags its tongue. I've traveled 10,000 miles to be welcomed home by a town that knows me only by my middle name and photos sent by post more than 25 years ago. And there is an old man from the foothills of the barrio's far edge who has heard my Uncle Charlie drag this small beast to the block, heard the news by music, the bottles, the banging, the laughter inside the slaughter. The old man limps the half-mile by foot up the long dirt road, unshod, a ratty tank top, a brand new Vegas cap, a cut black strip of inner tube draped around his neck. And in front of him, he is rolling the whole way a common jug on its side, emptied of all its vinegar, dusty, immense, to his hip in height and 3 times the old man's girth. My uncle is strumming the guts out of his ukulele when the old man arrives and sets the huge jug upright, pulls the bike tube off his nape, and stretches it across the jar's massive ceramic yawn, holding the rubber strip in place with one big, muddy toe. And on the downbeat of the first measure of the second chorus, he joins my uncle in the kind of mooing these beloved geezers swear has several times tricked a field of blossoms into bloom. The old man plucking from the makeshift bass, not so much a moan, but a pulse that ranges a full octave into each man's chest. The sinews of the old man's arms straining, the long muscle of his back taut, his quadricep, his calves, his black foot pumping blood into his whole awful body, his maw flashing every one of his 7 good teeth to heaven. And if a man become the heart of a giant, the song of a giant, each one of us laughing like a giant. If each one of us fulfill the exact measure of a man, and if the goat at the same time is singing as it's dying among men who are singing and dying, the youngest cousin among us, butcher, slaughterer, elbow deep in the animal's belly, does not sing. The carcass, bloodlet now, also silent, as if its stillness were a source of music too. The way in death one becomes all the sounds one cannot make. The sum total of everything the living cannot say. Sometimes we have to sing just to figure out what we cannot say. I'm just going to read two more. I'm going to read one more from actually, I'm going to read one from My American Kundiman, and then I'm going to finish with one from Boneshepherds. I almost didn't make it back because I teach down in Camden in New Jersey, but it's like across the river from Philly, and there's mad traffic, and I hate New Jersey traffic, but I love New Jersey. So this is, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Who's proud to be from New Jersey? Look at that. It's like one dude. Me and you. 3 of us. We got a crew. This is my love song. This is my love song for New Jersey. Kundiman ending on a theme from Tila Rock. Your morning's everyday stained call of exhaust, your plum bludgeon dusk, your fine stench and luckless French kiss, your can I get down bliss, your God gone blessed Jones for Loam, your Jersey Baroque, your Mercy 9 sirens prying every sky, your name, your flow, your funk, your everyday nasty, your very revelry, your breakneck scat, the loot, your boost, your rags, your 7,000 island slang, your hype, your hips, your spit, your sickest wit and snip, your every severed syllable, your blunt toke fables, your smoke's reprieve, your levers torque bearing, your body every day, every lovely mucking hum, your mic sound nice, every check one, your fade, your cut, your knife, your jazz on 2, your bass, your every clef, your left breast, your folly, your lung, your modest rot, your alibata tongue. Do you want it? Hell yeah, baby, because it's yours. And this is for all the MFA students in the world. This is a poem on how to light a fire, all right? Despedida ardiente. Dear feverless, dear poets, dear lovesick ones now cured, there are bloodless battles to be won, but stout your maw with your finest curses. Yap your demons to their proper graves. Oh, meek weepers, asymmetries, be kissed. Let the trash stack in the kitchen. Keep your lover a full day from work. Oh, sweet neglect. Oh, nectarine. Those bitter pits are meant for more than nibbling. There is a holy jump off. There is a funky genesis. There is a reason love and jive kind of rhyme. You oblong fruit, not 3 days ripe, somewhere in you lies the science of typhoons, a dream of strings. Oh, dirty word. Oh, first murder. Oh, cocoa butter whiff on a smoky bus. There are theories we're made of mostly nothing but motion. Oh, gap-toothed guitar. Oh, sound hole, you faraway drum, you slang mouth blessing, you long chime, you chamberless sextet. Let me leave you with a few last words. When mad dogs break chains to run at you, charge back. Bare your very teeth. No monster, I promise, outruns you. Whack them on the ankle with a stick. Chase the bastards down. Listen, this vertigo, this wreckage, this bad ballad straining the thickest tendon of your legs. Oh, darling sleepers, may you wake in the middle of the night to strange sounds, you champions of laughter. All you have to do is speak simply. Your business is the truth. Your heart's catastrophe is just a little of history's twisted bulwark. If there weren't a sky within your chest worth breaking, believe me, you would have stopped all this singing by now. Thank you.
God, that was incredible. I can't wait for the conversation because I have so many questions for Patrick. His work has inspired me for so long, and I'm so happy to be here, and I'm honored to be sharing the stage and the table with you. And Canem is home, and I'm really just so grateful to be home. So I'll start out with a poem that I feel like it's the poem that maybe tries to summarize some of the big questions that this book asks that really don't have answers, and it's called It and Company. We are a part of it, not guests. Is it us or what contains us? How can it be anything but an idea, something teetering on the spine of the number I? It is elegant, but coy. It avoids the blunt ends of our fingers as we point. We have gone looking for it everywhere, in Bibles and bandwidth, blooming like a wound from the ocean floor. Still, it resists the matter of false versus real. Unconvinced by our zeal, it is unappeasable. It is like some novels, vast and unreadable. So I guess in large part, these poems kind of started to pick up momentum on a little bit of a whim. I was thinking about science fiction and space as metaphors for, science fiction is always a metaphor for something that's, a problem in the culture at the moment. And so I was kind of trying to extrapolate from some of those early dated versions of the future and imagine what would be a helpful terrain to just consider some of the problems of, things we do to ourselves and to one another right now. And I was having fun with that. I was watching a lot of old science fiction movies that I'd seen as a kid. And then my father became ill and passed away very unexpectedly, and all of the lightheartedness kind of started to feel heavy, and I was thinking about real questions like grief and thinking about, well, if I do want to believe in something, what does it look like? Where do I want to imagine him? And I was also pregnant during the time, and you can imagine, there was a lot of connections I wanted to make. So this is a poem that maybe straddles both sides of that project, and I'll just read a few of the sections from it. It's called My God, It's Full of Stars. Charlton Heston is waiting to be let in. He asked once, politely, a second time with force from the diaphragm. The third time, he did it like Moses, arms raised high, face an apocryphal white. Shirt crisp, suit trim, he stoops a little, coming in, then grows tall. He scans the room. He stands until I gesture, then he sits. Birds commence their evening chatter. Someone fires charcoals out below. He'll take a whiskey if I have it, water if I don't. I ask him to start from the beginning, but he goes only halfway back. That was the future once, he says, before the world went upside down. Hero, survivor, God's right-hand man. I know he sees the blank surface of the moon, where I see a language built from brick and bone. He sits straight in his seat, takes a long, slow, high thespian breath, then lets it go. For all I knew, I was the last true man on this earth. And, may I smoke? The voices outside soften. Planes jet past, heading off or back. Someone cries that she does not want to go to bed. Footsteps overhead. A fountain in the neighbor's yard babbles to itself, and the night air lifts the sound indoors. It was another time, he says, picking up again. We were pioneers. Will you fight to stay alive here, riding the earth toward God knows where? I think of Atlantis, buried under ice, gone one day from sight. The shore from which it rose, now glacial and stark. Our eyes adjust to the dark. Perhaps the great error is believing we're alone, that the others have come and gone, a momentary blip, when all along space might be chock full of traffic, bursting at the seams with energy we neither feel nor see, flush against us, living, dying, deciding, setting solid feet down on planets everywhere, bowing to the great stars that command, pitching stones at whatever are their moons. They live wondering if they are the only ones, knowing only the wish to know, and the great black distance we flicker in. Maybe the dead know, their eyes widening at last, seeing the high beams of a million galaxies flick on at twilight. Hearing the engines flare, the horns not letting up, the frenzy of being. I want it to be one notch below Bedlam, like a radio without a dial, wide open so everything floods in at once, and sealed tight so nothing escapes, not even time, which should curl in on itself and loop around like smoke, so that I might be sitting now beside my father as he raises a lit match to the bowl of his pipe for the first time in the winter of 1959. When my father worked on the Hubble telescope, he said they operated like surgeons, scrubbed and sheathed in papery green, the room a clean cold and bright white. He'd read Larry Niven at home and drink scotch on the rocks, his eyes exhausted and pink. These were the Reagan years, when we lived with our finger on the button and struggled to view our enemies as children. My father spent whole seasons bowing before the oracle eye, hungry for what it would find. His face lit up whenever anyone asked, and his arms would rise as if he were weightless, perfectly at ease in the never-ending night of space. On the ground, we tied postcards to balloons for peace. Prince Charles married Lady Di. Rock Hudson died. We learned new words for things. The decade changed. The first few pictures came back blurred, and I felt ashamed for all the cheerful engineers, my father and his tribe. The second time, the optics jibed. We saw to the edge of all there is, so brutal and alive, it seemed to comprehend us back. Oh, yes, thank you. I was looking for this poem. So there are a few poems in here that are, the universe colon, and then there's maybe like a definition. So this is one of them. It's called The Universe Original Motion Picture Soundtrack. The first track still almost swings. Hi-hat and snare, even a few bars of sax, the stratosphere will singe out soon enough. Synthesized strings, then something like cellophane breaking in as if snagged to a shoe. Crinkle and drag, white noise, black noise. What must be voices bob up, then drop, like metal shavings in molasses. So much for us. So much for the flags we bored into planets dry as chalk, for the tin cans we filled with fire and rode like cowboys into all we tried to tame. Listen, the dark we've only ever imagined, now audible, thrumming, marbled with static like gristly meat. A chorus of engines churns. Silence taunts, a dare. Everything that disappears as if returning somewhere. Thank you. There's I guess these poems are really elegiac in lots of ways, but there's a sequence that's specifically an elegy for my father, and I'll read one of the poems in that sequence. It's called The Speed of Belief, and this is the first ghazal that I ever wrote. I always have my students write ghazals, and I'm so proud of them, and I feel like it's always a breakthrough for them, but I know I for years just was like, oh, well, that's something that's good for them. So I sat myself down and gave myself the same assignment, so this is the poem that came out of that. What does the storm set free? Spirits stripped of flesh on their slow walk. The poor in cities learn, when there's no place to lie down, walk. At night, the streets are minefields. Only sirens drown out the cries. If you're being followed, hang on to yourself and run. No, walk. I wandered through evenings of lit windows, laughter inside walls. The soul steps amid street lamps, errant stars, nothing else below walked. When we believed in the underworld, we buried fortunes for our dead, low country of dogs and servants where ghosts in gold-stitched robes walk. Old loves turn up in dreams, still livid at every slight. Show them out. This bed is full. Our limbs tangle in sleep, but our shadows walk. Perhaps one day it will be enough to live a few seasons and return to ash. No children to carry our names, no grief. Life will be a brief, hollow walk. My father won't lie still, though his legs are buried in trousers and socks. But where does all he knew, and all he must now know, walk? Thank you. So I owe a huge debt to David Bowie, right? I stole his title. There's a stolen line from one of his songs in the poem I just read. And in some ways, I felt like I wanted to make an homage to him in hope that maybe he would hear about it or something like that. So I'll just read you a section of a poem called Don't You Wonder Sometimes, which is really overtly thinking about him. Bowie is among us, right here in New York City, in a baseball cap and expensive jeans, ducking into a deli, flashing all those teeth at the doorman on his way back up. Or he's hailing a taxi on Lafayette as the sky clouds over at dusk. He's in no rush, doesn't feel the way you'd think he feels, doesn't strut or gloat, tells jokes. I've lived here all these years and never seen him, like not knowing a comet from a shooting star. But I'll bet he burns bright, dragging a tail of white-hot matter the way some of us track tissue back from the toilet stall. He's got the whole world under his foot, and we are small alongside, though there are occasions when a man his size can meet your eyes for just a blip of time and send a thought like, shine, 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 straight to your mind. Bowie, I want to believe you. want to feel your will like the wind before rain, the kind everything simply obeys, swept up in that hypnotic dance as if something with the power to do so had looked its way and said, "Go ahead." Thanks. I think I'll stop there so we can start the conversation.
So first of all, I just want to say thanks to both of you for those incredible readings. Beautiful work. And also, Tracy, you had a lot of questions for Patrick. At any time, you feel free. I don't want you to feel like I'm in charge. So I just wanted to start off, you both, it's interesting to listen to you both read. You have very different styles of reading and writing, but you both spoke about questions that you address in your poetry. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the questions that you are asking and attempting to answer in your work.
I feel like every poem is triggered for me, and I think for a lot of poets, by questions, right? Like, I used to always feel like I had, when I was a grad student, I had to write based on what I knew, stories I remembered and could, kind of like spin in a certain way, and I would get about 1/3 of the way down the page, and then I would freeze up because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, my knowledge had kind of expired or run out. And when I realized that I could ask questions in poems, and that the poem could be a vehicle or a pretext for just exploring something that I wanted to understand better, then it became fun, and I felt sort of liberated. And so I just kind of, maybe I'm so grateful to that discovery that it's something that informs my process.
Yeah, a lot of things running through my head. I feel like sort of thematically, I felt a real kinship with Tracy's book, both Duende and Life on Mars, but particularly Life on Mars, in the way that we're both trying to figure out why things are so fucked up. We belong to a particular moment in history, right? Tracy's references to sort of to what's happening in the headlines and sort of and pop culture things, and also this immense grief and a sense of intimacy and love. Like, how do all those things occupy the same space? And I think when I was either in I think I was in grad school. I got to see June Jordan read at Rutgers in New Brunswick, and I bought Kissing God Goodbye. And I was like, how the hell is she writing these love poems and not forgetting that she is a historical being and a political being? So I think that a lot of my questions came from that time, and June Jordan really was a model for me in what kinds of questions to ask about sort of what is the official record and what is the personal narrative.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also is this close enough? Can you hear me? Okay. I also think one of the side effects of asking those questions, like, how can we be happy in a world that is so, cruel? It's also, the unsettling part of that question is, how am I complicit, Mm-hmm. And I think I used to always be sort of like afraid or judgmental about political poetry because I thought, I don't want to do that. And I think one of the reasons I felt that way was I was just young. But the other reason is sometimes it's very easy to draw a line between the speaker of a poem who is on the right side of things and whoever's being considered or addressed who's on the wrong side. And that's too easy, and it's false. And so I like scaring myself and chastening myself by saying, how can I keep going until I feel the weight of my own contributions to things that I despise or that I regret.
Mm-hmm. I think that you both engage in like a lot of current events, and you've both spoken about that. Is there a hope for you when you're writing about these issues? Like, not necessarily going to change the world, but that in writing about them, do you have any kind of hope for how it will affect the readers of your work? Or, is there anything beyond just the exercise for you of getting it out on the page that you're kind of like reaching for?
I think that there is hope. it's in the music of the language. The music carries both the hope and the history, if that makes any sense. But in the rhythm, in whatever music I can sort of crank out of the line and of the image, to me, that's, I don't know if that makes sense to people, but music moves, right? And it's also the vehicle through which history can possibly move. So that to me is hopeful, almost independent of what the line says. It's how the line sounds. Must sound absolutely nuts to some people, but I have a great faith in sort of the transformation of music, and particularly as a poet, the music of language.
Mm-hmm. Can I just, that makes me think of one of the things that I really want to talk to you about. Can I?
Oh, shit. Here we go.
No, when you say movement, that's what I feel and see so much in your work. The ability that you have to take a thought or feeling and you bring it into language, but it's almost like choreographed onto the page. So it's like there's a line in I'm not going to keep doing this. I promise. And maybe I won't do it because I can't even find it. But okay, well, I'll come back to it because it's something that is in the long poem that you started out with. It's just, okay, here's an example. The feeling that makes you close your eyes and clench every muscle from, like that description. So you're taking something that's completely immaterial and slippery and indescribable, and your way of bringing it into consciousness is by moving it through the body. Mm-hmm. And I feel like so much of what your work does is it carries something that's unsayable into language by way of the body and by way of some gesture that can be choreographed. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how you do that or the degree to which you're conscious of that, or is it just an extension of your belief about how we are, how
I think I can theorize about it. I don't know that I have a definitive answer, but I grew up like a hardcore Catholic. My dad, some of you know this, my dad is an ex-Catholic priest and he was like a theologian for the Catholic Church. Thomas Aquinas he studied. He was, like no fucking joke. Like we used to get beat with like Matchbox tracks, those tracks? Like, we used to get beat with those, and my dad would quote Aquinas to us while we were in Latin, the Summa Theologica. I love him. He's coming next week. That said, there was something we were delivered sort of two contradictory messages about our bodies when we were young. One is to deny it as Catholics, and the other one as sort of like Filipinos who love to dance and eat and kiss and hug and be with one another is to acknowledge it in the presence of other people. And so I think that I want something of that that contradiction in my own poems, that tension between those two things. And so the composition of a poem inside the body is very important to me. And the remaking of the poem in the air from the body toward other bodies is also very important to me. And so that's also the role of music, right? That the music will resonate. That's how I reach other bodies, is through the music. That's the hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you dodged the question about hope.
Well, it's hard because part of me does think, okay, I want to figure this out. I've been reading about this, hearing about this in the news. I'm unsettled by it. I want to kind of just get into the mess of it, and that's what the poem invites me to do. But then there is a part of me that every now and then says, okay, I want this book to speak to other people who might be unsettled by similar things, mm-hmm. and maybe it can become a vehicle for a conversation. Mm-hmm. So I don't think, it's not like, oh, I'm going to change the world by writing these poems, but I really believe that when you put something into words, it becomes real in a way. And that's, there's a poem in my second book where the speaker is a dog, and it says, my death will come on wheels and leave no trail. And I every time I read that, I just think, God, I wish I wouldn't have said that, because that's probably, that's how much I believe that words can, lead to realities. But I also think that there's something real that happens when a poem is made and shared. And I don't know what it adds up to in terms of policy, but I feel like it's important.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely understand that. I think that starting a conversation or saying something out loud, I often find myself in the position where I'm like, thank you for saying that out loud, as if to say, like, by stating it, you have made it now a part of the public dialogue, which, you know, I think is probably true. So the other day I was listening to this interview with a writer who was talking about the practice of writing poetry, and he said something about it that was really interesting to me that I wanted to bring up today. He was talking about how there's something about poetry that is kind of this inevitable failure to express something that is unexpressible, and that poetry itself is like kind of the gap between where the medium gets to its point where it can no longer go, it can go no further, and like what that thing is, that gap between that thing that's inexpressible and the point at which you've said all you can say and you can't quite get to it. So I guess I just wondered what you thought about that idea. Do you find that is that something that you think applies to your own work? Do you think that's true about poetry?
I've heard, there's someone who is from Bennington here, and there was a poet who gave a talk and was talking about aposioposis, which she described as what the ellipses are gesturing toward. It's the silence, and I guess when words have run out of what they're capable of saying, they reach a point where something happens or something sits that's important. And I really love that idea, and I feel it, because I feel like the silences in poems are sometimes more important than what surrounds them. And the words are really just kind of trying to push you toward that point of feeling or consideration or something that's more visceral, and then tipping you past that to what's really important. And it's a work that you do inside of yourself without language. And it is a conundrum, because a poem, you know, what it has to work with are these words that we live with, that we speak into telephones, that, you know, sometimes don't have a lot of meaning. But I feel like they're capable of making you aware of the spaces where words can't cross into. I mean, it's kind of like what your poem ends with. We have to sing in order to know what we cannot say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just thinking, you know, mathematics has some beautiful ideas. They're like, literally, they're aesthetically beautiful. And one of them, to me, is the asymptote. You know, the idea that something can approach a limit, continue to get closer and closer and closer, and never arrive at that. And that limit is is silence, right? The other one is sort of, if you remember your college calculus, is the yeah, I know. But there's the discontinuous function, right? So you can have a function which is like a line, right? But you have a discontinuous function in which the line is broken up. And a broken line is really interesting to me. I love funk music, and funk relies on silences. It's about the hesitations, it's about the expectation of a sound and then no sound coming. That's what makes it funky, right? Mm-hmm. So poetry to me is also about, we imagine poetry as sort of being the composition of language. What it really is, what it is also at the same time, is the composition of silences in order to make it funky.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel that you incorporate that idea of silence into your work? I mean, your work, a lot of it moves really quickly. It's like very full of motion. So I guess, how do you feel that you've incorporated that space, either on the page? I see it on the page frequently, but like in your reading and your writing, how does that come into play?
I guess the most obvious sort of material craft thing that I could think of is like, I love sort of really funny enjambments at the end of a line, and being able to hear. Just being able to hear where the pauses, the possibilities of pauses in a line are, that have a natural or even unnatural relationship to everyday speech. So everyday speech to me is sort of like that creates the expectation of language in some ways, and then poetry can sort of move toward and away from that expectation. Does that make sense? And so by building silences, you can sort of make these things that are a little bit funky. right?
I think there's also like leaps. There's a silence that exists between two ideas that are connected only associatively, and that it's, you know, in my classroom I talk about it as kind of a spark. There's energy, there's wonder, and but it's also that space is silent. You know, even if you move past it very quickly, you've gone somewhere and you realize that you've like lifted up and set yourself down in an elsewhere.
Yeah. Did you find that in your writing this most recent book, you were talking about that process, and it seemed as if where you began with the book and where you ended up with it were very different places just because of what had happened in your life. Did you find that you were able to tie in these ideas that may have seemed disparate, and, you know, maybe talk about that process?
I think so, and partly because, you know, I feel like I don't really have much of a background in science, and yet this is a book that, you know, is thinking about something that we usually think of in the language of science. And so I would always find myself running out of knowledge, and I would have to lift myself out of, maybe it was a visual context that I was trying to, you know, like thinking about something, or, and then use some other kind of knowing, you know, like go from what is literal to what is felt, and when you cross that line, then something happens. I think that's why there are so many, you know, there are so many questions and speculations that I hope don't need to be answered, because, you know, the gesture toward that big, you know, the unknowns sometimes can be more compelling, not even just interesting, but it's real, and there's something heavy writing on it, and maybe that's, you know, at the heart of what I think a poem really is going for.
Yeah. So another thing that I've been hearing a lot, and probably will always hear, is that, you know, I was reading a blog a while back where this writer was lamenting and kind of resenting the fact that he was constantly finding himself in this position where he's being asked to defend poetry and defend poetry's relevance. And it does seem that poetry, more than any other written art, is always being debated about, like, oh, is it dead? Is it worthwhile? Like, why does it exist? And I just wondered, why do you find that you're being asked that question a lot, and why do you think what is it about poetry that leads people to have this conversation about it so much, you know, more than novels or memoirs or nonfiction?
I'm flattered by that, because it reminds me of the debate that people have had forever about whether God exists, you know? And so I think, oh, poetry must be really important if it's something that so many people want to believe isn't important. So that's, I console myself with that idea.
That's great. I'm not sure. I mean, clearly in this room, you don't have to prove nothing to nobody, right? It kind of depends on where you go. And maybe the other thing that it points to, too, is sort of like, or warns us against, is sort of the insularity of poetry, and the insularity of the world, and how the illusion of the mutual exclusivity between sort of the innovations of language and living a daily life, as if those two things could not occupy the same space. I'm not sure. I know that when I go into sort of like, when I'm in other sort of social circles where it's not among artists or anything like that, it can feel very strange to try to explain, like you're literally trying to explain what you do, and especially if you have like an ego like mine, you think you're doing some new shit, right? Like, it's not like I can say, yeah, check out Robert Frost, then you know what I'm doing, you know? And I love Robert Frost, but you're not gonna get an idea of what I'm doing by reading The Mending Wall, you know what I mean? So I think partially depends on where it's at. Also, I feel like, I mean, poetry is like, I think what we acknowledge as poetry in our culture too is much bigger than what sort of the academy defines it as in its traditional definition. I mean, there are folks who are sort of like doing things on the borders, like you know, this woman is beloved to a lot of people in the room, but Latasha Diggs, I mean, is she making poems? I mean, she's doing these sound poems things. So the things that we acknowledge, as in terms of like what is poetry, like that's also just like a blurry thing. I'll say one more thing because I know I'm rambling. When I was in the Philippines, somebody told me the story, and I didn't get a chance to witness this. But somebody told me the story that there were these crews of kids running around the Manila metro area and going to all the karaoke bars. And what they would do is they would beg the karaoke bar owners to turn on the karaoke machines and give them a few free tunes so that they could freestyle over the karaoke things in Tagalog. Now, like, give those kids an NEA grant. That shit is kind of amazing to me. You know, first of all, the use of something that's not. It's not for the thing that it's not intended to be used for. And that, to me, is sort of an innovation to language. I mean, like, karaoke music is like the cheesiest music that you can possibly make. So what would it be like to sort of, to freestyle, to make a text over this other kind of music? Anyway.
Yeah. I also think that there's something, there are different ways that question is asked. And when it's asked among writers, then maybe we're asking ourselves, well, how important is innovation and tradition? And when it's asked in, like bars by people who, don't read poetry, don't live, have a sense of living poetry, I think it comes from, I don't know, like fear, but I don't want to say like poetry is scary, but I think a lot of people have been, we've had bad experiences in classrooms where teachers try and make you feel like there's a joke or a trick in the middle of a poem that you have to try and riddle out. So you're working against the impulse of a poem, which I think is to invite you in. And so I think that question is about almost like wanting to know if there's something other than that feeling of being in combat with something impenetrable. If there's another side to the form that might be worth experiencing.
I'm teaching a course in the fall. It's like a gen ed course called How to Read a Poem. And the thing that I'm working against is like, I can measure and grade how much a student understands about a poem. But how do I measure and reward how much they enjoy a poem? Like, there's something really radical. I mean, there's something really radical then about joy in the academy, isn't there? If there's like, it's hard to talk about it in faculty meetings and in mission statements and in syllabi for that matter. Like, I feel like putting that in my syllabus, like, enjoy yourself in this class. Like, enjoy the poems, So there's sort of like there's a little bit of a conflict in terms of the ways that the most meaningful way that we can enjoy poetry is not necessarily by counting syllables, although I think that's a valuable activity when you're reading poems sometimes. But the one that's sort of left at the door, I think, often is that element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of the academy, there's not a lot of poetry controversy, I don't think, but recently. The most explosive controversy in poetry was Helen Vendler's battle with Rita Dove over her anthology. And I thought that there was this idea being presented that I think is really common, actually, in the literary world and maybe just in general in American society. This idea that multiculturalism and diversity is kind of in direct opposition to quality and as if by engaging in this kind of plural idea of what's good, you are watering down the work. And do you find that you're encountering this kind of attitude, moving through the poetry world? Is this something that you find that you're working against, or is it not an issue in your lives?
I was really shocked by that crazy review and the way that she defended it. Mostly because it felt so out of step with how I had understood Vendler's perspective on even some of the poets that she's, upset about to be. And I was really happy that it was so shocking to me because I think it meant that it's something that I've gotten used to not hearing or not listening for. I mean, it shocks you into a certain kind of, alertness, vigilance. But because you want to make sure maybe this is a conversation that I'm ignoring. Mm-hmm. But I also really kind of believe that may not be a prevalent perspective. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, you know what? I heard about the whole Rita Dove thing, and I didn't follow it for various reasons. But it upset me, and I think right around the same time too, there was someone from Salon had sort of written this rant about the decisions in the National Book Award. Did anybody know what I'm talking about? About the National Book Award decisions from 2010, I think it was, and it was sort of
people picking colleagues, or is that what you're talking about?
No, it was something about picking like small presses and using it as a sort of way to make up for sort of past historical, mistakes. There's something about that's similar about that about that view, and.
Well, that makes me want to contradict myself now. Because when you say it like that, then I start thinking, these are the terms. And even, if you haven't read that review, you should, because the language and the pitch of the language is not measured, academic, or rational. There's something fearful and angry. And the rhetoric, she takes cheap shots that are very uncharacteristic of her, and they're sloppy. And then that reminds me of the way that, I could think about political situations where people, without maybe being as overt as, being explicit, are also saying, I'm afraid, because this doesn't look like me. And I guess this is something that hasn't gone away, and I feel like it makes me afraid when I think about the Republican Party, because I feel like so much of the rhetoric that's coming out of the Republican Party behaves like that.
Yeah, the whole take America back kind of attitude, like from where?
Yeah, back to like 1862. Yeah. So that means the poet, like the hope that we go back to that question of hope. If we can train ourselves to anticipate, listen, and respond, and invite a different kind of discourse, even in the realm of art, that might have an effect outside, as well.
Yeah. So what is, going back to the literary landscape right now, we're all sitting up here, multicultural, obviously, and that's great. And Kanem's work is, helping this to happen. Are there things about this current landscape, what do you think about the landscape right now for minority writers and poets? Are there things about it that excite you, that interest you? What is your feeling about, the current situation with that?
I feel like Canem and Kundiman and the Asian American Writers Workshop and other organizations with similar missions have really, I'm going to say it, have saved American poetry by bringing in so much energy, virtuosity, and really different and necessary kinds of questions. And it's also done more than that, because that's what we say when we say, well, multiculturalism is important because of diversity. But it's also, for me, made very clear the fact that there are all of these lateral connections across the lines that we ordinarily and very easily think of. And the tradition is something that really moves. It's liquid and fluid. And I feel like it's hard to read, read work that's coming out of these workshops and these contests and not recognize that, any given poet can draw almost, a sense of heritage from several different places that 25 years ago we would have thought to be impossible, or someone would have thought to be impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that before today's reading. I was like even as just 50 years ago, there wasn't no motherfucker in the academy that dreamt this, right? That we were not a part of that dream in the academy. So yeah, definitely. I feel really excited about some books that are coming out. I'm going to plug some Kundiman folks right now. Like Eugenia Lee, who's in the audience, her book is going to be coming out in a couple of years that I'm really excited about. Bryn Saito, Matthew Olsman. There's a bunch of Kundiman folks who are amazing poets whose books are about to come out, or who I imagine their manuscripts are going to get picked up. Hosanna Asuncion is also here. She was a PSA Chapbook Award winner, and just, it feels great. Because when I got my MFA, I was looking around, and I think part of the reason why I have such a close relationship to women's poetry, queer poetry, and black poetry, and Latino poetry is because I didn't have as many models. So I was looking at people who were just doing something that was outside of whatever was like sort of normative, you know? And it's so exciting to see how much is happening now. In terms of like what I hope for in the current landscape, I want all these various communities to, well, especially sort of like the wider sort of like white buying community to realize that you will actually like poetry by black folks. You will actually like poetry by Asian Americans and by Latinos. That feels like the next step, right? Like we are generating work and we're generating an audience. Now it's time to sort of like, we don't belong in the back shelf of Barnes and Noble facing the back. Like put us on the shelf and like read our books because they're good fucking books. You know?
Yes. On that note, I just want to open it up for questions from the audience. If anybody has anything, I think, is there someone with a microphone that's going to run? Yes, there's someone with a microphone that's going to run up. This person over here.
What do you feel like is this is to both of you guys. What do you feel like is the place of slam and spoken word in poetry today?
I've slammed twice in my life. I got second place in Austin, and I won at Bar 13. So that's my resume with slam poetry. To me, I feel a great kinship, of course, with slam poetry because of its the way that. Because it's oral poetry, like the oral traditions. Like my uncles were a bunch of shit talkers and liars and like storytellers, and my aunties too, you know. And it's in the tradition of that, and I think it's very important. It's the very thing that sort of connects poetry to the body, you know. And maybe for you who don't know, like this gets. I mean, I think folks in slam always have to remind folks about this. But Mark Smith created slam as a gimmick. Like the scores don't mean nothing, right? Like it was meant. Because poetry was not popular, it was meant to get people into Green Mill to listen to poetry. And look at it, it's everywhere. Like it's all around the world. I'm not romanticizing it. The slam and sort of, I mean, Mo could talk a little bit more about sort of like the national scene or whatever. It's got its flaws, but it's democratized it in a way that's really, really amazing. So I think it's quite important.
Do you want to comment on that?
I don't know. I agree with what Pat says, and I also feel like the division between this and that is kind of getting very blurred in a great way. That energy of something that's moving and active and shared, spoken, is also, I feel, drawing from the sense of rigor and revision that we tend to think of when we think of poems on the page, and the reverse is also true.
You have another question right here.
Hi, thank you both. I really enjoyed your work and you reading it, and I like seeing it on the page as well, so I'll be sure and buy the books. And I guess I had two questions. One is, how do you write? When you're writing, are you writing on a machine, a computer, a typewriter, by hand? I know a lot of poets in particular, in contrast to fiction writers who still write by hand, they like the connection to the body. So I was wondering if you could say a few words about how you write. And then the second question is themes. Like when, do you think of, I want this next book to be about X, or I'm particularly fascinated by Y, and so then you organize kind of plot out the poems, or do the poems control you? Do they tell you what you're going to write about next?
I write on the computer pretty much exclusively because I like to see what the poem is going to look like, and I feel that I can think more quickly that way. And in terms of themes, I on one level, I feel like I'm just writing one poem at a time. But on another level, I have a sense of the obsessions that are bringing me to the page, and because they're often characterized by a certain period of time, they have something in common. And so I'll just kind of trust that. And when the time comes to say, what do I have, then I'll try and see if there's a way to emphasize, you know, whatever the themes might be.
I have like moleskins that I write in, but I also write in my, like, I wanted to bring Tracy's Life on Mars because I have like 3 poems written in the, like this is not the back cover. This is like my journal. Like whenever you know the books that I love, like Larry Levis and Tracy, and like you'll see like I have like drafts of poems in like all the empty spaces that you can find in the book, you know. So I write, you know, I write on receipts and whatever I can sort of get going on. But in terms of sort of sequencing a book, I also sort of, I don't imagine a project. It's funny that sort of has come into the lexicon of the Academy of Writing, because it's a corporate word to have a project, you know, and there's something about the consumption, about it as being about consumption rather than art, that's interesting to me. But I imagine myself composing really individually, and the book, in the end, the manuscript is sort of like, that's the discovery of the relationship between the discrete poems, right? If each poem is sort of like, it's a process of discovery, and you're sort of like, that you have that, oh shit moment, like 4 or 5 times. It's that like language orgasm, whatever happens, you know? Then it also happens in the composition of the book. When you put it together and you're 2/3, 3/5, 4/5, 9/10 of the way through, you're like, that's what I've been writing about. And then it's like, oh, I need these 3 or 4 pieces to give it its architecture and shape. And then you're like, ta-da!
Yeah.
More questions? Oh, we have one right here.
I have 2 questions. First is specifically for Patrick, but Tracy, you kind of touched on it as well. Just your earlier points about the body and the poems moving through the body, and then just the music of the language. You spoke about the Catholicism in it, but I noticed, and I haven't read the latest book yet, but especially in Uprock, Headspin, Scramble, and Dive, the way I read the poems, or at least like meter or rhythm, and or it was like pop locking, or like I saw like a b-boy moving throughout a lot of the poems, and wanted to ask you if that was ever an intent, or just the influence of hip hop per se in your writing and career, and then for both for those working on manuscripts, like I'm the Youth Poet Laureate of New York City, the current one, so I have to publish my first book in November. Just any advice or tips on working on the manuscript, and to what to avoid and what to do. So yeah, thank you.
In terms of my relationship to hip hop, the relationship of my poems to hip hop, I think the most obvious connection, when sort of the general cultural thinks of hip hop and poetry, you think of slam, or you think of spoken word, and you think of MCs. Let me tell you something. Even if everybody in this room got high, you would not like my rhymes. I am not an MC. I don't belong in a cipher, but I was an okay dancer, and I was an okay DJ. And so my lessons from hip hop came from dancing and from mixing and making music. And there are many things that I learned from those 2 art forms. Maybe the most primary one is the art of the mistake, because you're engaged with a live audience as a dancer and as a DJ. Shit doesn't go your way all the time. And so you have to make the best out of whatever happens. Somebody bumps a table when you're like in the middle of like doing the thing, you gotta turn it into something, or you're about to do a baby swipe and like your arm gives out, you gotta make it look like that's a part of the art, There's something really valuable about knowing how to do that, or trying to do that with language, and welcoming the unexpected, welcoming, in fact, mistakes. I feel like there's something really subversive about that, because we have a myth of purity and perfection in this culture, and hip hop allows you to be human. You know, not only does it allow you to be human, it allows you to make mistakes and then make the mistakes into something else also. So.
What about advice? Advice. I want to give good advice. If you have till November to write a first book. I would say, yeah, just. Oh, this is good advice I got recently. I'm working on prose, and sometimes I feel scared because it's a new language. And somebody told me that he was told, just write it wrong, because you can go back and fix it, but just write it wrong. And, or just maybe write it right, but just write it, generate, and take the risks that it will be necessary for you to continue to come back to the page and feel like you're not repeating yourself. And think about, what if I did this, what would happen, and follow it through.
More questions? I think there was one more right over here. Two. Oh, okay.
Hello. I teach creative writing to middle school students, and we're getting ready to work on poetry again. And I just want to know, if you were standing in my classroom, what is the most important message that you would get across to them about either writing or appreciating poetry?
I would say that a poem asks you to rely on different kinds of sense, and we go in often thinking the literal cerebral sense, that lives in prose and that lives in argument, and that exists in a poem, but it also is, accompanied by the sonic sense, so that something can mean because of how it sounds, or associative sense, so that something that can trigger another idea that doesn't follow logically, but that enhances or relates in an important way. So I would want to say to your students, listen for all those different kinds of sense as you're reading a poem, and that's one way of ensuring that you might be more likely to enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think we have two more, and then we'll have to wrap up. So,
ladies first.
Very good.
I was just wondering about your process, poem by poem. How do you go about starting a poem? Where does it spring from? How does it start, and what's the editing process?
Terrifying. All of it, terrifying. These days, my teaching doesn't really allow me to write as much as I would like to write, but I just write whenever I can. I think there are two things. Even before you get to the page, the pen to the page, there's two things about that have to happen to begin your writing. One is to read, the other is to live. You have to you got to read at least twice as much as you write, maybe 3, 4, 5 times as much as you write, and you got to pay attention, to just what's in the world, and that's the beginning of the writing. Before the ink even starts to flow, the poem starts to cook when you're reading and when you're in the world. So that's the most important thing. Everything else, it's my habits are not going to help you. The thing that's going to be common between me and you is we both will need to read, and we will both need to pay attention to the world.
That's great. Yeah, I agree with that.
Next question.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for coming. You sort of just touched on this with your last answer, but I was going to ask, why do you write? Is it like breathing? You need it to live? Do you just need to, do something habitual like that just to get your emotions out, your angst? So that's my question.
I feel like I write because when I am writing or thinking about writing, I feel like I'm listening better, to experience and to the voices that I'm surrounded by, and to the you know, the inner voice that you have that we sometimes like to imagine is connected to something better than ourselves. So that's probably why I do it.
I came to write, I don't know why I continue to do this, but I came to writing because I wanted to be a composer and a musician. My dad wanted me to be an attorney, so I got revenge. There was somewhere along the line that I learned that you could do with language what DJs do with beats, and that's move people, you know. So I like to be surprised by the music of the language. That's why I write.
Okay, we have a little bit of time left, so the last couple questions. I think there was one hand here and one here.
Hi. I was just wondering, can you talk a little bit about some of the major themes that reoccur in your work and then how they've maybe morphed over the course of your career as a poet?
That's a really good question. I wish you'd asked me that yesterday so I could have prepared. I find that, you know, my private life always comes into, obviously, my poems. I'm thinking about myself and my world as I feel it. And the external world is also something that's on my mind. And I find that from collection to collection, the external world creates the lens through which some of those private concerns are considered. So in my second book, I was thinking about this idea of survival and resistance, and conveniently I was going through a divorce when I was writing the poems, and so that idea of survival and the different kinds of like private crises that we move through really felt like it was working in parallel with some of the things that I was thinking about in the world. So yeah, there's a way that the world kind of bends my sense of what it is that I'm living.
It's so hard. I mean, the first two books are so heavily hip-hop inflected. The third one has some of it in it, but not as much. So I think I was trying on some other modes of speech and of sound in the third book. Also, in my first book, I have a poem called 9,000 Outlines, which is really weird. It almost doesn't belong in the book, and it's about this sort of ambiguous dream. Near rape scene, you're not sure exactly what happens, but it has elements of fable in it. And then over the course of all three books, like just all this magic is starting to sort of show up in the language, and I'm really excited and curious about the worlds that are starting to be built in this book and whatever I think that I'm going to be working on coming to.
Okay, I think we had one more in the front. Do you still have that question? Okay. Oh, wait, they're recording, so they're going to give you a microphone.
I like to think I'm loud. It was wonderful to hear you both and to see all of you and everyone here, to be here for poetry. It just does my heart so much good. It's like medicine. But my question was actually generated by the conversation, which is how else do you cross-pollinate your work in terms of inspiration? So you talked about music and dance, but are there any other forms besides, you know, the written word, reading? Like, do you go to museums or watch movies? Like, is there another way you go to the well, fill the well?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, art, like film and visual art, but film for me is even more, like I feel like I speak the language a little bit more fluently, at least in my own imagination of film. Maybe I feel like I can talk about film and understand it in a way that makes it feel like it's kind of a corollary to a lot of what happens in a poem, you know, and poetry is so much less expensive in a way, but you can employ some of the same cinematic tools, and so that's something that I feel like I'm always trying to learn from. And music, I live with music, you know, in my home, in my headphones all the time, and I feel like that, you know, the distances that a single song in just a few minutes can allow you to cross, that's something that I am constantly trying to understand how I can bring in and then bring in differently in a poem. And then also, you know, dreams. I always like to think that there's a syntax to dreams that I want to try and draw from in the way that a poem works.
Music. I play guitar. I don't have a piano in my apartment, but I play a lot of guitar. I pretend that I'm having a concert in my apartment, and so I do a lot of that. Even though, sometimes I just won't write for a little while, and I'll just get up and I'll play guitar for a few weeks or a few months and not touch the page. And the other thing that I find myself doing, now I'm giving away my secrets. People aren't gonna want to talk to me after this, but I just have conversations with people. Like, somehow I end up in these conversations, and I'm always the one asking the questions, and part of me is like digging a little bit. Like a DJ digs in crates. Like, I'm asking people questions like, there's a poem, I'm gonna write that down. So I steal a lot of shit from other people, basically.
Well, thank you to the audience for your engaging questions, and thank you so much to Tracy and Patrick for your beautiful poetry and your words tonight.